Milton Keynes, United Kingdom. Natalie Hemming, a life cut short by domestic violence and murder. In the spring of 2016, a young woman named Natalie Hemming vanished without a trace. Within just a few hours of her disappearance becoming known, the police had a suspect in custody. But was he truly guilty? Natalie's family had their own suspicions about who was responsible for her tragic fate. During those terrifying events, Natalie was living in Milton Keynes, United Kingdom. She had grown up in a fatherless household, surrounded by 2 sisters and 2 brothers. As the youngest sibling, she was often indulged, and despite occasional childhood squabbles, the siblings grew as close as possible as they matured. Natalie was an avid reader with a passion for history, English, and dance. Her loved ones described her as a strong-willed, straightforward individual who never hesitated to show kindness and offer support to those who needed it. In 2007, at the age of 21, Natalie met Paul Hemming, a 32-year-old man. She already had a child from a previous failed marriage, and they simply couldn't make it work. Paul seemed like a wonderful person, and they quickly found common ground and began living together. He accepted her daughter as his own, but those who knew Paul understood that he was hiding his true face. Some considered him cold and cruel, skillfully concealing his true nature. Nevertheless, the couple's relationship persisted, considering that Paul was well off, had his own house and a car. Their relationship produced 2 children, born 3 years apart. But this story is far from a happy one. Let's fast forward to 2016. By this point, Natalie's daughter from her previous marriage was 12, their middle son was 6, and their youngest daughter was only 3. The relationship had become strained, accompanied by frequent arguments, and led to the destruction of the family. Some of Paul's actions defied explanation. For example, they were engaged and planning their wedding, but Paul abruptly called it off despite all the preparations, humiliating Natalie by not showing up for the ceremony. He also skipped their children's baptisms. Paul, the head of the household, was described as an extremely controlling person who demanded that everything be done his way. He subjected Natalie to constant monitoring, periodic cruelty, emotional, psychological, and physical abuse. Despite this, she took his last name. It later emerged that the first incident of violence occurred back in 2007, just a few months after the start of their relationship. Natalie received a message on her phone, but didn't have a chance to read it before Paul reacted aggressively. He hurled the phone at her and then smashed her head, leaving abrasions and wounds. After that, he refused to take her to the hospital and continued to beat Natalie. At some point, he stopped, which allowed him to regain control and take the injured woman to the hospital for treatment. In the car, he threatened her, insisting that she must not tell anything to the doctors or the police. She obeyed him. However, the medical staff reported the incident to the police. Law enforcement intervened, but Natalie refused to press charges against her partner. He swore it was the first and last time. Remarkably, this manipulation worked. Natalie not only did not file a complaint against Paul, but also continued the relationship with the tyrant. Unfortunately, the domestic violence continued, and she carefully concealed it. Even her relatives couldn't say with certainty what was happening in her home, although they felt that something was wrong. During another argument, Paul threw a glass bottle at Natalie. After this incident, the police intervened again. Frightened, Natalie temporarily left with the children to her mother's house. Sometime later, in Yorkshire in 2013, Paul fell to his knees, begging her to come back and making empty promises. As before, she agreed to return, but as it turned out, he remained the same and did not change his behavior in any way. The years of cruelty and domestic violence stretched until 2016. Finally, Natalie decided to end it once and for all and leave the domestic tyrant. She confided in her parents, who wholeheartedly supported her decision. They recalled how this choice brought her happiness, in stark contrast to the long years of tyranny. She seemed to blossom. Natalie continued to live with Paul and the children, albeit in separate rooms, while they sorted out the divorce. She had a plan to amicably resolve all issues, including housing and children. This arrangement would have allowed her and the children to calmly find a new place to live and move on. However, These plans were shattered when Natalie Hemming disappeared on May 1, 2016. The day before, on April 30th, when she was last seen, Natalie had left the children with her mother. She had planned a date with Simon, a colleague she had recently started seeing. They had met at the Mercedes car dealership where they worked together. Initially, they were just friends, but soon realized they were perfect for each other. They planned to have a wonderful evening at a restaurant or bar. That evening, Paul arrived at Natalie's mother's house to pick up their daughter, who was having trouble falling asleep. Noticing Natalie's car, he was puzzled by her absence at her mother's home. He inquired about her whereabouts, but her mother, unaware of the date, assumed Natalie was out with friends. Paul was visibly displeased and left. On the morning of May 1st, Natalie returned from her date to her mother's house and then went back to Paul's house with the rest of the children around lunchtime. When her mother later tried to contact her to ensure they had arrived safely, she received no response, assuming everyone had gone to bed. The next day, the woman called again but still got no answer. This was unlike Natalie, who communicated with her mother daily. Now she had been unreachable for 2 days. The mother reached out to other relatives, sisters, and Natalie's friends. Everyone reported the same thing. They couldn't get through to her, and everyone became alarmed. After all, it was highly uncharacteristic for her to ignore her loved ones for days. The family decided to visit Paul's house. He was reluctant to let them in, but one of the brothers pushed past him and searched the rooms, finding no trace of his sister. They demanded to know what he had done to Natalie, but the man claimed she had simply gone away for a few days. This lie was hard to believe. Natalie's car was parked next to the house, and she had no plans to leave. Moreover, she would never abandon her children with this tyrant. Natalie's mother contacted the police, reporting her daughter missing. Officers arrived on the scene and immediately searched the man's house. Finding no signs of Natalie, they interviewed him. The police wanted to examine his phone, but he refused, claiming that Natalie might call him at any moment. He was extremely agitated and couldn't part with his phone for long. The officers then checked the young woman's mobile phone activity and bank accounts. It turned out that since her disappearance, she had not conducted any transactions. If she had left, how was she paying for travel and food? The police grew increasingly suspicious that Paul Hemming was involved in Natalie's disappearance. He clumsily answered questions and was extremely reluctant to allow the officers to conduct a cursory search of the house. Ultimately, the police decided to detain the man, who became the prime suspect in the woman's disappearance. During interrogation, Paul told the officers the same story that the missing woman's relatives had heard. Natalie had returned with the children on May 1st, but was not herself. That evening, she said she needed to take a walk, while he had been home with the children all day and hadn't gone out. However, the investigators heard new details that had not been disclosed to the mother and brothers. Paul revealed that Natalie had confessed to him that she had been raped. The guy from work she had gone on a date with had taken her to his place, where he had harassed and assaulted his victim. This was what had troubled Natalie so much. Unable to cope, she had admitted this to Paul. The incident had prompted her to go for a walk to clear her head. But this, too, turned out to be a lie. Simon denied raping Natalie, and this was further disproved by Natalie's messages to a friend, in which she recounted how wonderfully she had spent the evening. She described how sweet and well-behaved Simon had been. She also continued to correspond with Simon himself. It was unlikely that she would write this way about her rapist and continue to communicate with him. Security cameras at the hotel captured the couple that night, showing them very happy. They were smiling and kissing before driving home. This further demonstrated that Natalie had not been subjected to violence by Simon. The police also refuted the man's claim that he had not left the house all day after Natalie's departure. They tracked his car on camera footage and discovered it on recordings from several surveillance cameras. However, this was not particularly alarming, as the police could not charge Paul with anything beyond suspicion. They needed physical evidence. After all, there was still a possibility that Natalie had simply left. Undoubtedly, Paul had emerged as the prime suspect. The police had repeatedly received reports from doctors about him abusing the woman. The police speculated that he had become jealous of the woman's new boyfriend, killed her in a fit of rage, and hidden the body. However, There were other possibilities, and she could have indeed gone for a walk and been attacked. In any case, she still had not made contact. In addition to all the lies originating from the main suspect in the case, the children themselves provided interesting information. They were in the house the night their mother disappeared. The son reported hearing a loud bang around 6:30 in the morning. He woke up and went downstairs to see what had happened. According to him, he saw their mother sleeping on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Paul was sitting and cleaning up. The child was only 6 years old. Obviously, he didn't understand that his mother would never wake up again, as she was already dead. The boy, afraid that his father would scold him for not being asleep at such an early hour, returned to his room. He also mentioned that a large rug from the living room had disappeared from the house. In the morning, Paul was thoroughly cleaning, which was uncharacteristic of him. He sent some items to the dry cleaners. The police responded to the boy's account, obtained a search warrant, and went to the alleged murder scene. The detectives hit the bullseye. During the search, forensic experts discovered poorly washed bloodstains in the living room itself, on the floor near the coffee table, and in the trunk of Paul's car. Apparently, after the murder, he had taken the body away somewhere. On May 16, 2016, the police arrested the prime suspect, now on suspicion of murdering Natalie. But the case was far from over. He did not confess to the crime and refused to cooperate with the investigation, sticking to his original version. The police needed to find more substantial evidence, such as the murder weapon or the victim's body. The officers checked the video footage from all the cameras in the city. They found the car on the recordings from that day, around 10:15, 15 kilometers from the city. Around 12:16, he was returning. What happened during that time remained off camera. As it turned out, the man had deliberately taken secondary and little-used roads to avoid surveillance cameras. The investigation could have dragged on due to the absence of a body. Pressing charges and proving involvement in court was very difficult. However, on May 22nd, the police received a call. A farmer living 30 kilometers from the city had discovered the body of a woman on the edge of his field. She was naked and already decomposing. After DNA analysis, the police confirmed that it was Natalie Hemming, who was 31 years old at the time of her death. The degree of decomposition significantly complicated the work of the forensic expert. Nevertheless, specialists established that the cause of the woman's death was a blow to the head in the temple area. Additionally, her arm was broken. She had likely tried to fight for her life and sustained this injury in the process. After all this, the police were able to charge Paul Hemming with murder. Despite adhering to his initial version of events until the last moment, he confessed just before the October 2016 trial began. The man claimed that Natalie had died not as a result of an argument, but due to an accident. That evening, Paul had thrown a decorative object resembling a Fabergé egg at her. It hit her in the head, causing her to fall, and later he realized she had died. In a panic, he put the body in the car and drove it out of town. However, no one believed this story. Investigators believed it was not an accidental incident, but a premeditated murder, if only because the deceased had a broken arm, indicating a struggle between them. The prosecutor believed that jealousy was the motive for the murder. Paul had found out that his ex had a new boyfriend, and it had angered him. When he read the correspondence about the night Natalie had spent with Simon, he flew into a rage. The defense fought until the end to have the man tried under a milder article, but the jury sided with the prosecution. In late November 2016, 42-year-old Paul Hemming was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 20 years. Paul expressed no desire to apologize for his actions, and custody of Natalie's children was granted to her family. Thank you for watching this video. Write your opinion in the comments, and also do not forget to put a like if you like this story. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.